still looking to get a few more folks, but we'll go ahead and kick it off. Thanks everyone for coming on a Thursday morning for the Practical Development Solutions Affinity Group. Today we're going to be talking about historic renovations, and I might hand it over to Emily to kind of introduce the thought behind this agenda, and then we can hand it over to our presenters.
All right. Hi, good morning, everyone. Hi, Lauren. Thank you for helping to coordinate this, and thank you to our presenters. The goal was to learn a little bit more about what some of the wonderful companies are doing with historic preservation and affordable housing. It is a challenge that a lot of our nonprofit clients are facing. A lot of the buildings were originally renovated in 80s or 90s or even earlier. And so as we move forward to try and preserve and create more housing, wanting to preserve the historic assets. And obviously there are a lot of challenges. So we just thought it would be great to bring some of those experts together to share some of their thoughts along their journey through renovation. So we have SMR here, RAFN, LIHI, and Environmental Works. And I don't think we decided who was going to present first. So I'm going to ask, Jill, do you want to kick it off, or do you want to let RAFN kick it off?
I can kick it off. I just literally got out of my car, so I'm a little,
okay.
I'm a little crazed.
All right. Well, why don't we let RAFN go?
Okay.
I think they're ready. And the goal was to let each of the groups share some slides and information about their projects, maybe 20 minutes each, and then we'll have time for questions. We can see how it goes. Maybe there'll be questions during the presentations. Just raise your hand and we'll work it out. All right, I'm going to go on mute. I see Ryan and Patrick. Are you able to share screen? That would be our next technical. Hey, awesome. All right, fantastic. All right, you want to full screen that? Hey, you're even. Awesome. We got this.
All right, can you hear us? Okay, all right. So you said experts. I don't know that we're experts, but we're experienced. So we,
experienced.
Share our experience, yeah.
Yeah, so these are options and ideas that through our years of working on some of the projects that we have come across. A lot of these come up quite a bit on each of the individual projects. So we thought we'd share some of the things to think about when we're approaching these fun types of projects.
And our big focus is occupied versus unoccupied renovation.
Right. So I think the first decision or the first thing to think about whether it can be done unoccupied, please. Typically that can't happen. So some of the things to think about in an occupied project.
Yeah, so there's really like we have on the screen here, there's three big items to be concerned with occupied renovation. Is of course to separate the work from the residents. And we use our normal tools for that. We phase the project, temp fencing, overhead protection, alternate egress pathways. Of course, life safety is a huge part of maintaining a safe job site that's on occupied renovation. So a couple things to consider are that you have to maintain all the life safety systems. Fire sprinkler, fire alarm, plumbing, heating, air conditioning if you have it. And then the third big thing to consider with occupied renovation is, of course, is communication. So there's a tendency to not give residents too much information, but it really comes out in our experience that it's better to give people more information than not enough about what to expect in an occupied renovation project. well ahead of when it happens. We found in our experience that the more we communicate with residents, the more often and the more detailed, the better off they are, because people tend to sometimes imagine much worse than what's really going to happen. And then as far as communication is concerned, we do look ahead schedules. We notify people, months in advance, and then weeks in advance, and then days in advance. And then we also have small things like Starbucks coffee cards that we carry around in our pockets during occupied renovation. So sometimes when their feathers are a little ruffled, they might get a Starbucks gift card to smooth over the edges. And then other times when people are happy with us, they get a reward for being nice and putting up with an occupied renovation. So those are three big things.
If we're in unoccupied, this is our contractor's dream. We can sequence a project for maximum efficiency, productivity. The scope, something to think about is as we're putting together the must-haves for the scope, we're also trying to put together, while we're here, let's do this. So, if we're gonna relocate people, we're gonna go through that process. That's some consideration to do as much as we can while we've opened up the project. Which of course leads to subcontractors being faster. They can get in and do their whole scope of work at one time rather than multiple mobilizations, and that of course accelerates the schedule and reduces cost. Here's some examples of projects where we have this side of the hall was occupied. We're doing some of the work on the unoccupied side of the hall. Patrick talked about the historic or the temporary enclosures that we used. You can imagine trying to have a resident on each side of their unit. We're trying to put in a concrete wall in between their unit.
One of the things we have on that picture on the left, where the guys are putting in the crown molding, we pick subcontractors. Those are our guys actually, but our employees and subcontractors, we try to pick people that have the right temperament for this kind of work when you have occupied renovation, because of course you have to be able to get your work done effectively, but then also be nice to residents when they come out of their unit into the hallway and you're working. You have to be respectful of their time and space and still get your work done. So there's definitely a unique personality skill set that's required from our carpenters, ourselves, and subcontractors.
Here's an example where unoccupied made the most sense. This is Town Hall, downtown Seattle. We had talked about potentially doing this occupied on the lower floor, still having performances while we're trying to renovate the inside of the upper area there. And it didn't make sense from financial and just the amount of work that needed to be done in order to make that feasible. We would have had office staff here while we're trying to blow a hole in their wall to get into the elevator pit. So this is a decision as a team, program-wise, budget-wise, and work-wise. It just made more sense for us to do this unoccupied. Then we talked about having these old buildings. Some are landmarked, some are just old. Some of the differences for landmarked, there's different types of landmark project. There could be Seattle landmark, or could be the local landmark board, could be national. So the key is to identify what specifically is landmarked. And then you kind of build the project around dealing with those elements that we need to protect or restore. Some of the restricted areas of work, for example, maybe where the windows are historic, so we've got to take care with the windows to protect those. But then they may come into conflict with what the building code or the energy code requires. So there's some negotiation back and forth, trying to determine historic preservation versus code. You know, the push-pull there. Sometimes it's negotiating with the certification people who help you work through that and try to see what makes the most sense. Protection of historic elements as well. That's part of the project. Patrick and I were looking at a project where they had a grand hall. It's a Masonic lodge in UW, and they've got some murals that they wanted to protect. So not only are we protecting those, but we're also trying to engineer the structural around those elements. So it's not just the protection of it, it's actually trying to achieve the scope of work around the historic elements. Something to take quite a bit of coordination and planning. Preservation consultants are they are out there, and they are helpful in helping guide you through the process, and also negotiating with say the National Park Service of ways to get what they would like, and then also do what makes sense for the building. Again, talked about reviewing the energy code and building code, you know, seeing how to try to fit those two into what makes sense for the building. And then there's just an old building. It's not, it's really yours to do what you want with.
So yeah, like Ryan mentioned, yeah, is it landmarked or is it just old? And then of course, who makes that decision? So typically the building owner is the person that decides whether they want their project to be landmarked or not. Everybody has different reasons to landmark and reasons not to. Like Ryan mentioned, the project we looked at, which is the Masonic Lodge, University Masonic Lodge, where they don't want the project to be landmarked because they want the flexibility to do what they want to be able to do to save their building, and as Ryan mentioned, save the murals. So that's the first thing is, yeah, whether it's landmarked or just old. But we love just old buildings, not to make it sound insignificant, but things of course to consider is the cost to save. Back to that example, we had those murals that were basically priceless to the Masonic Lodge. And then there's also floor covering in that grand hall that's from 1910 that they would like to preserve, but it's not quite as important to them as the murals. So it's one of those things where it's like, do we spend the money to protect the floor covering, or can the floor covering be removed or just get destroyed in the construction process? But we want to make sure we save the murals. So sometimes it's the cost to save, cost to protect versus the cost to save or cost to replace. Of course, protection is a big part of the work and a big part of the cost. So every project has different values to it, that what's important to save and what's important to maybe replicate or remove and reinstall, or sometimes it's better to just build it new, but it looks like it's old. So there's quite a few things to consider there that we look at on most historic renovations.
Here's a project that we did. I think someone on the call may have been part of this. They can correct us if we're wrong, but so the historic elements here, one example was these windows, the arch was what was historic. And there's quite a few of them on all these dormers. And so the team got together and figured out that putting in a standard rectangular window and was more cost efficient than trying to order and have an arched window made. And so from the inside, putting in a standard window, rectangular window, but yet the outside, the arch was preserved. Another example is these stairwells were considered deemed historic and landmark. And so this was keeping the stairwell as much
Intact as we could. So the pony walls were historic. And then the architect chose to separate the pony wall from the extension.
So this extension here was a code upgrade, right, for stairwell. So, you know, the historic element is still distinguished, but this is a compromise for code versus historic. You know, these doors were also historic. So this was an example of preserving the doors and making new hardware work with the operation of the existing doors. This was a building that's just old, but the owner determined that what was important to them were the ceilings and the plaster within the project. So those were the scopes of work were designed around protecting those. So careful placement of any of the MEP upgrades, protection, and then you can see on the outside the protection of exterior elements to preserve there. Another distinguishing is for historic buildings, whether it's commercial versus residential. For commercial spaces, really the big thing is that, you know, it's a public space. There are services that are typically provided for, you know, there's a reason it's there. Are they providing services to the community or a certain demographic? And so those services still need to be provided. So the decision is, if we still need to provide it, do we provide it within the space, or do we relocate and provide those services elsewhere? So similar to resident relocation, services do we relocate services? Do we stop the services for a period of time in order to do the work? So that's a decision that needs to be contemplated. And then the big one is ADA requirements. If it is a public space, then we run into ADA requirements that may conflict with historic elements of the building.
The other side of that coin, of course, is that if it's a residential project, where how do we do the work, you know, possibly phase the work, which we've done in the past, or you know, can you actually afford to move residents out? Is there enough places for them to go? We have a project that we did that was a 10-story building downtown. So there was practically, we couldn't relocate a 10-story building full of people. There was not enough affordable housing available for them to move into, even if they could or wanted to. In that particular situation, there was some residents that, of course, didn't want to live in an occupied renovation, which we completely understand. So some residents were relocated. Of course, a big thing to consider with that is a relocation agent. That's not the right term, but
Consultant,
specialist.
I think
Yeah.
is a
So
good one.
that's a big thing. It's a hard person to find, but it's invaluable. So in the past, we've had it where we hire somebody that basically is a liaison between us and the residents that are moving out. And sometimes they're not moving out, they're just moving floors. In that particular instance, on that building, we had, we emptied the floor and then moved people from floor to floor during the phase of construction. So people were displaced temporarily into a different floor. We gutted the whole floor inside and out, interior, exterior work, and then moved them back into brand new apartments, and then went floor by floor. Another thing to consider is of course, the cost of moving people. If you have to relocate people, how much does it cost? Is there enough places for them to go versus construction? So if you can build the project a lot faster, of course, being unoccupied and not having to relocate, or excuse me, being unoccupied, there's obviously a cost benefit to that, but then how does that outweigh the cost impact of relocating people? And then also the type of units. Typically, if you have a building full of studio apartments, it's a little bit easier to relocate people than it is if they're 2 or 3 bedroom apartments with families, because there's not as many large apartments in the city to be able to relocate people to.
Another thing to consider with the relocation specialist, it actually provides a buffer between the developer and the residents. And so we can focus on the project itself rather than trying to, deal with the residents' concerns and the moving. That's a full-time job versus also trying to do the work itself.
There's also some occupancy concerns that, your architect can help you determine. If you move all the residents out, do you lose your occupancy permit wise for the building? And then when you try to move people back in after you've done the work, do you have to regain your occupancy as far as permit inspections, which is not quite the same experience as if the building is occupied while you're working. So it's just something to keep in mind early on. And then of course, the way the work is permitted, if it's permitted in phasing or permitted where it's the city thinks it's empty versus occupied. So just a couple things to have in your forefront of your mind when you're getting ready to start.
This is a project we recently completed. It's provided services for the community, and so you can see people already lined up in the new space. Those services were relocated while we did the work, and so that made sense for this project to relocate the services.
And this is a food bank, right?
Yes, this is the Bird Bar project. Another benefit that we uncovered was unoccupied. In doing the work, we were actually able to open up more space, and so we were able to find an old skylight that we were able to refurbish and put back into use. So that was an added benefit. And there were some ADA requirements that we were able to incorporate into this as we were doing the work. This one was both commercial and residential. So on the first floor, there was a museum, and then there were units above. So this coordination of some of the historic elements that were able to be achieved, keeping some of the exposed brick, but also working to determine energy code if we could do some work elsewhere to increase some of the energy efficiency in order to keep the walls exposed.
And this project was already unoccupied, so it was just a plus in the renovation side of it.
For the last major issue or decision-making process is whether, if it is occupied, can it be phased or unphased? So if we talk about the phased project, then
So yeah, we typically on a phase project, usually if it's occupied, we often phase the work. Sometimes we phase the work to separate the work from the residents. Other times we phase the work because we can only affect so much of the site at one time based on the size of the crew and subcontractor availability. So we had a project where it was a year long and we had 3 phases. So residents were only affected, 4 months at a time. So we had, notified residents ahead of time, well before starting the project in a kickoff meeting. So some people didn't have to worry about construction until the spring, and even though we started in the fall, other people were on the first phase, so they got the pain out of the way first, and then other people knew we were coming eventually. Some of the issues we run into in the past about permitting is that if the work is permitted in phase, then the city allows us to close out portions of the project at a time, versus if you permit it like it's all going to happen at the same time, beginning and end, and then decide to phase the project after the fact, it makes it a little bit more difficult with the building department.
And as well as the life safety elements, it's easier if it's phased and the inspectors come and they can see that the systems are still in operation, even if we're moving people within the unit or within the building. Unphased, essentially, it's a cost versus income calculation. Working around all the resident or tenant, what is the cost of that versus the income that you're going to receive by having them in place, or the cost of moving them out. So that's the factor here. Sometimes it's not our choice, or not, and it's just something we have to work with. But if there is that's the calculator there. What's the cost of the work and the protection and working around everybody versus what you're going to get in return for whether income or a cost for relocation. This is an office building. This was phased. Two Pine downtown. I think this people might remember the old Nordstrom Rack building. So there were tenants on different floors, and so we had to keep the lobby and the elevators operational during this time. And so this was over 2 to 3 years worth of work being done, and then some tenants moved out, and then so it said, okay, while they're out, let's renovate their space. And so there were some advantages here, but there was also advantages of keeping the tenants in place due to leases and just the income that was being generated. This is the Camlin Hotel near the Paramount Theater. This was it was a Trend West project, and so we did a study of whether it made sense to try to keep it operational while we're renovating, but the cost versus income just did not make sense to, because the room rates would have been dropped significantly for trying to get people to come and stay at your place while you're doing construction in it, versus the cost of just taking it out of their portfolio for 9 months, do the work, and then open it back up. So that's what we had. Some of our takeaways, I think my main takeaway is if we can do as much exploratory work up front on these historic buildings and old buildings, it pays off so much in the end. So you're not having to redesign or rescope the work. Sometimes you find something and it wasn't part of the scope of work, and then you're adding work. And so as much exploratory work as can be done
Ahead of construction, yeah.
is
The other big takeaway we have for this is flexibility. So generally the projects come to us and that we do some kind of rough order magnitude pricing, and it starts out where it's unoccupied, and generally mostly start that way. And then the flexibility side is just to keep an open mind that things will probably change, and they usually change kind of at the last minute. And you might put a project together and schedule it, and the building's gonna be empty, and then for whatever reason, sometimes it's a funding source or lack of availability to be able to move people out, that now the project's changed and it has to be an occupied renovation. And the path from the beginning to the end is not usually a straight line when it's renovation like it is with new construction. So a big part of it is really just to keep an open mind and be flexible and realize that there's probably big changes will happen before construction, and usually they're a lot of times at the last minute. And we found if you just have that mentality in the beginning, it makes it a lot easier to kind of roll with it as you go.
patience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Very good thoughts and information. Jill from LIHI, Jill Davies, would you like to share some of thoughts? And I think, Robert, are you tag teaming?
I'm chiming in.
Okay, chiming in. All right. And then we also have Andrew Phillips from SMR, and I think he has some slides to share next.
Okay, is this working? Can you see my
Yeah.
screen? Okay,
Great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I should get rid of this. How do I get rid of that? There we go. So hi, I also have Brad Ruling is here who can chime in, and I see Robin Amadon is on here too, who could chime in, I'm sure, with lots of great stuff. So yeah, the Fry, 234 units of very low income Section 8. Let's see here. Okay. Here's where we started on our budget. We thought we would be at about 30 million. We ended up with about 4.6, almost 4.7 in change orders. And the majority of that was the cornice, which is, you can see here in this photo, which is absolutely gorgeous, but was in much worse shape than we thought it was. And other masonry work that just, once we got into it, proved to be in worse shape than we had hoped. So we were an occupied renovation, kind of a very rough timeline. In early 2018, we stopped filling vacancies, and we were coming on about 5 vacancies per month just through attrition. So we were able to get to, I think, about 45 by the time we started. And then we started moving tenants. We did our renovation not floor by floor, which would have been a lot cleaner, but because of the plumbing, we had to do it in vertical stacks. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. But we had to move folks sort of out of the first vertical stack so that we could get in and demo and get to all the plumbing that was up and down in the building. And then in April of 2019, notice to proceed. We got through the last, we had sort of a ticking clock for our tax credits. So we had to get the building completely reoccupied by the end of 2020. So we got the last of the units done in late November of 2020, right in the middle of the holidays. And then we were able to get completely leased up with just 2 days to spare in the year there. And then we continued working on a lot of the exterior stuff and finally finished the project in the summer of 2021. Some of the big problems that we had to solve. The building was powered by steam. A lot of those steam pipes were leaking in walls. These radiators were all rusted out. They were really difficult to regulate on heat. Steam was an incredibly expensive utility. So we made a decision to pull all of that and to go to electric cove heaters in the units. We just had enough electrical capacity in the building to be able to switch over to this. It was really tight. We talked about a few different options on thermostats, and we ended up going with this one with King, which I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head. I think it's like the primary market for it is like rentals, like condos and stuff, where, you know, people go in and they turn the heat way up, and then it sets the idea is it sets itself back, so you're not paying, you know, for them to heat the hotel room at 80 degrees in perpetuity. So we decided that we would do a setback to 66 after 12 hours, and then a major setback to 52 after 48 hours. And this is, you know, we're paying all the utilities at the Fry. People have a tendency to do just that. You know, they turn their heat up as high as possible. They crack their window. They disappear for days on end, and then we're paying lots and lots of electricity bills. So I think that this has helped us save some money at the project. It was a little bit of a learning curve with the tenants to kind of educate them on, you know, if you want a certain temperature, you just got to get into the habit of touching the thermostat in the morning and touch it again in the evening, and then it'll stay where you want it. We had, you know, original plumbing. It's a 1908 building. A lot of original plumbing buried in these beautiful old bathrooms. You can see on the left, the left two pictures is, those are some of the coolest bathrooms, which I really wanted to save, but there was just no way to do it. The waistlines were encased in sort of concrete and rubble under all this old tile, and they were failing. And so, you know, really the only cost-effective way was for us to just completely demo them out. One positive of that is that we, you know, we had this step, which was difficult for a lot of our tenants, and that was in almost all the units before, and now the bathrooms are all on level. Let's see, kitchens, kind of a tough population at the Fry, and so our property management staff really wanted a kitchen setup that was more durable than what they had before. They were replacing a lot of cabinets on turns. So we went with a commercial grade restaurant setup with these stainless steel shelves and kind of open sink cabinets. So far, I think they are actually holding up really well. Again, there was a little bit of a complaint process with tenants who were used to having, you know, doors that closed on their cabinets, but we worked on selling them on this is kind of the cool new modern look. Let's see what else. Expect the unexpected. So this was really exciting. We were in the middle of our renovation, and then they knocked down the building just to the south of our parking garage. And in the process of that building getting knocked down, our parking garage south wall started to come down as well. So that was a little bit of a distraction. We had to kind of pivot. There's Brad up on the roof. There's lots of pictures of Brad through this project, trying to figure out what to do. And so we worked with our parking garage operator and brought Walsh, our wonderful contractor, in to do some repairs to this wall. And it's much better built now than it was before. So that's great. This was also right in the heart of COVID. So luckily the parking garage was not very busy at that time.
We were able to deem it as emergency work.
Yes.
Robert did go in quickly to get a permit, and we convinced the contractor, the masonry contractor, to stay on and complete the work. So it worked out well.
Here's expect the unexpected chapter 2. So we had, I think our original budget had something like 350,000 for cornice repair work.
Right.
And we were expecting, you know, to just go in and, you know, find some pieces that needed to be repaired. And then as we began to look, it was much worse shape than anyone had thought. And so this ended up being about 2.7 million. And so then rather than going in and repairing spot repair, we pulled the whole thing off and went with, Robert, is it Architectural Castings, I think is the group?
Yeah, they're down in Portland. Fantastic people to work with. They've done a lot of work on terracotta in the Pacific Northwest.
So we pulled everything. They did sort of they took molds. I think I have a picture of this. Yeah. So they, on the left, this is, you know, some of the pieces that they were able to, Pioneer Masonry was able to pull off and keep intact. And then they get sent down to Portland, they make molds of them, and then they make it in a new material that's much lighter weight than the terracotta. And it goes back up.
We determined everything below Brad's head here was intact, and everything above Brad's head was in danger of falling on the sidewalk below. And I don't know if you remember the Prefontaine building, which is north of us. Before we saw this problem, the brick parapet of the Prefontaine building collapsed onto the sidewalk, and fortunately in the middle of the night. And so we realized that it is a real possibility that this could cause some serious damage.
Rest assured, my head is intact.
Yeah, we did not want anyone to get smashed down on the sidewalk. And that, I mean, I think that informed a lot of our choices, actually. I mean, when we were talking about the seismic improvements that needed to be done, we focused our money on the sidewalk sides. You know, we thought a lot about what do we do to kind of prevent somebody from getting smashed. So hopefully we made the right choices. I guess that will get tested, you know, at some point when when we have our next earthquake. This picture on the right is also, this is on the south side of the building, where we also encountered quite a bit of water intrusion that had gotten, you know, in through the brick and then caused the steel underlying to rust and swell. And so this is putting back some support just on the inside side to help strengthen that wall. More pictures of the cornice repair. You know, another thing around the cornice repair is that we hadn't expected to have to scaffold the whole building like this, and so that was a big part of that change order expense, was to have to come back and put the scaffold all the way up on both street sides. The terracotta that came off was just so heavy, there was no way to do it without scaffolding.
And I think it was about $300,000 worth of scaffolding. This is one of those properties in Pioneer Square that has a sub-basement underneath the sidewalk. And so the sidewalk was not sufficiently strong to support the scaffolding all around the building. So we actually had to go back in and provide structural cribbing underneath the sidewalk in order to support the weight of the scaffolding. And that cribbing is in place today because we didn't have enough money to repair the sidewalk. So that's for a future generation to do.
And you can see here on the right, that's kind of the before and after on the old terracotta, and then the new sort of faux terracotta there on the bottom. Again, scaffolding all the way up lots and lots of scaffolding. We had so many, I mean, we had shenanigans down there in Pioneer Square. I mean, people climbing the scaffolding, breaking into the building, you know, people who had been barred from the building, figuring out ways to get in. It was a crazy, crazy time. This is the alley side, kind of a before, during, and during. You know, let's see, what was it? It was a parge coat over brick in really bad shape. So, you know, scraping and trying to get down to the sound part of it. Full replacement of windows. Because we are in the Pioneer Square Historic District, we were required to keep the street facades pretty much original. So we had bare wood window, do some significant repairs on windows on the street sides, and those are still the original windows. We added a second pane of glass. And then on the non-street sides, we were able to get the Pioneer Square Preservation Board to agree to an Anderson window that is fiberglass, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yes.
That looks very, very similar. It was just a little bit smaller, but double hung, just like the windows on the primary sides. So this is putting in those new Anderson windows on the alley side there. And that's me helping check the paint job, being very brave and going outside on the swing stage. More extensive repair to bricks. This is the south side, and you can see some of those areas where we were seeing the bricks start to bulge out because of the rusting underneath. So removing those to get to that steel, sort of grind that rust off, and then coat it with a coating to help protect it.
I'll talk about that more later, but
Yeah.
Because of the way that the fry is constructed, this will be a problem for eternity. And so there will always be moisture in the wall. The steel will always be rusting and scaling and swelling and displacing brick. And a lot of this repair work was done 25 years ago. And you'll probably have more to do in the next 25 years. So that's the labor of love of maintaining a historic building like this.
Yes. And Pioneer Masonry actually did the original
Yes.
restorations that far back. And we were lucky enough to have the same structural engineer and Pioneer come back and do this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is just, I love this photo because we were testing different cleaners on the brick, and this is just this is how dirty it was. It really looks a lot better now, I think. This is code. Wow, the code. We just had so many, code conversations. And this is just an example of one. I mean, we have this beautiful old marble stairway with this, I don't know, it's probably mahogany cap on it. And it's not high enough anymore. So, what do we do? There were a lot of different conversations about, we can cut into the cap and we can add something. And we ended up doing just this, kind of simple rail on the inside of it, because I really didn't want to destroy any of that existing wood and marble. So, it's a little bit utilitarian, but at least all the original stuff is still there. This is a picture you can see through to the King County Courthouse. We have two old elevators at the Fry, which are very, very well occupied by tenants at pretty much all times. So, this being an occupied renovation, this was a challenge to figure out how we were going to get debris down and materials up. And so Walsh opted to put a construction elevator on the outside there. You can see on the right picture. So we had to pull a window. You know, again, we went in front of the Pioneer Square Preservation Board so many times. Robert is like an expert at it now. So we had to go and promise that we would put the window back exactly the same. This is the hallway. On the left, you can see we still have those original 1908 double doors that go out to the fire escape on the alley. This is what the ceiling looks like, you know, without the drop ceiling in the middle. We had a little bit of code trauma around that too, because we were occupied. We were getting mixed messages about whether the drop ceiling needed to stay intact. Somebody said it can go, so it went, and then somebody else said, no, it can't be there because your fire system's not going to work right. So that was, you know, kind of temped back up, and then we had to just take it down piece by piece as we were working in those ceilings. And then we were on fire watch for a couple of days. That was really exciting. And then on the right, you can see the new fire escape doors. We went to a metal with a relight on the side, which is nice because there are actually some really cool views outside those doors. Okay, occupied renovation. RAFN talked about this a little bit. This is what we're up against. This is one of my coworkers. We moved everybody in the building at least one time. You know, all the existing tenants stayed. We worked with existing tenants, you know, to try to accommodate where they wanted to land in their final unit. And we continued to collect rents and subsidies during the whole renovation. You know, those were the pros. The cons, of course, yes, much slower. Everybody had to be moved at least once, sometimes several times, depending on their specific situation. And we had, you know, in a building like this, we have a lot of hoarding, there's a lot of roaches, a lot of bed bugs. So there was a real process to get these units ready for the general contractor. We, like I mentioned in the beginning, we worked in zones. So this, I think, ended up changing a little bit, but the general idea of it is that we had, you know, approximately 13 vertical zones, and we would empty, you know, one or two at a time and move people forward to empty units in the rest of the building and get those units renovated. And then we would move, you know, the next people, hopefully to their final unit, back into those zones that had then been completed. But sometimes it wasn't the final unit for a number of different reasons, right? I mean, we had different size units in this building. We have different funding sources for some of the units. So it was a complicated puzzle. Here's more pictures of staff.
Jill, you don't have a picture of the big board you guys maintain with all the Post-its and the swapping?
Yeah, it's coming, Brad.
Oh, it's coming. Okay, good.
Yeah. You know, I mean, some tenants were really organized and able to kind of move themselves, and you know, we're ready on moving day. And, you know, we did bring in some outside movers to help move from unit to unit, but other tenants just really struggled. And so, I mean, we had an awesome team at the Fry, case managers and staff that had been there a long time and really had good relationships with these tenants. And so a lot of times it was just a matter of, you know, I'm coming today and I'm going to spend several hours with you and we're going to pack stuff up and, you know, kind of helping the process along. This is Hannah in my office. We had the whole building mapped out in unit by unit, sort of where people were going to land. And there's this whole method here where, you know, the green Post-its were, that was going to be their final unit, but the more teal colored Post-it was if that was just a temporary jump unit and then they were going to land somebody somewhere else. And we were like taking pictures of this all the time because we were terrified that someone was going to break into our office at night and like tear it all down and we would have no idea what was happening. I mean, just hours and hours and hours of thinking about where people were going to go and, checking in with them, are they ready? Did they turn in their key? Have they packed? Do they need boxes? Do we have movers lined up? Are we going to do it ourselves? A real mixed bag in terms of the process of moving tenants, depending on who the tenant was. Lots of hoarding, lots of bed bugs. We had Paratex, a great vendor that worked with us. They were coming in weekly and spraying units. We were, the units, as we were emptying them, we were trying to get them sprayed, I think, at least twice, 1 week apart, for bed bugs and roaches, so that by the time the contractors came in, nothing was still moving. Terrazzo, this is the terrazzo floor in the lobby getting ground down. It looked really, really pretty after it was done. And by the way, it was COVID during all this. And so here's just a picture of, on May 14th, we turned the community room into a vaccination center, and the fire department came in to try to vaccinate everybody. I was laughing because this is, as I was looking through old pictures of the fry, this was a typical dinner that I was eating during this period of time.
Sorry.
Thought, oh, that's really funny. And then this, I think this is my last slide. This is just a picture of it at the end, and it looks really clean and pretty. And it was an amazing project. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you, Jill. It was. Brad and I were joking yesterday that just seeing these pictures is sort of re-traumatizing us to all of the things that we had to deal with for 2 years. Ryan and Patrick mentioned historic building versus code, and that came up a lot on the fry, and particularly how we dealt with energy code. And given the steel deterioration that we were uncovering, given the prevalence of bed bugs in the project, we became convinced that full compliance with energy code, because this was a substantial alteration, which according to the building department meant furring out and insulating the interior walls, would be the death of this building. It would reduce occupiable square footage. It would provide a very happy home for bed bugs for eternity. And it would interfere with moisture movement through the exterior wall, and so probably hasten the destruction of the structural steel. The Seattle Energy Code is great, and we absolutely have to do some really difficult, expensive things if we want to save the planet. But sometimes the code is just wrong. And sometimes those negotiations are as much about politics as they are about science. And I'm convinced that the only reason that we were able to prevail and to save this building was because of the relationships between the owner, LIHI, and City Hall. So I would encourage all of you building owners to maintain those relationships, because sometimes they can come in very handy. At the very least, it saved us $2 million. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was as-built drawings, and Jill's going to laugh. Jill's going to laugh at this part. So especially if you're dealing with an occupied renovation, as we did here, you're not going to be able to get in and verify the accuracy of the drawings, especially if it's a project as large as this with 234 tenants to negotiate access with. So the design relied upon drawings that were provided to us by the owner that were 25 years old. And inevitably, there were some inaccuracies, and those inaccuracies meant that we were designing on the fly. in this case, we happen to benefit greatly from a skilled design build MEP sub, McDonald Miller, who was able to point out, gee, all of the waistlines are buried in rubble. Here's a design option. Or you thought that this unit was configured like this, but on this floor, for some reason, it is completely different than the floor above and below. Here's a design solution. So that actually worked out well, although Asterisk maintain a large contingency because this stuff is going to happen on any renovation. But and RAFN might correct me on this. As-built drawings that are produced and delivered to the owner by a contractor these days are hyperlinked Bluebeam PDFs, which are awesome. But for the architect who comes along 20 years from now, they're not terribly useful. And although technology is inevitably going to change, I think what we have to plan on is delivering some sort of accurate digital file to the owner so that the owner can plan the work that they do 30 years from now. And that means telling your architect to maintain accurate digital drawings as you go along. And it's a task that we all want to kick down the road. And I'm sort of anticipating Jill laughing now because we're still working on it. And it's a year and a half or 2 years later, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what it was that got built and deliver an accurate digital record of that to the owner.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Sorry, I'm distracted by warehouses emptying out across in Pioneer Square right now. I think we have Andrew Phillips from SMR. Are you equally distracted by what's going on outside?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Would you like to share? I think you had some slides. Sure. That would be great.
And then just for the RAFN folks and LIHI and everyone, there's a couple of questions in the chat if you wanted to.
Oh yeah, well, Andrew's getting ready. First question was the cornice GFRC? Is that what you guys ended up with on the Fry?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And is the Fry officially a landmark building?
The exterior, yes, is contributing. It's considered, the building is considered as a contributing factor to the historic district.
Is it on the landmarks, the national landmarks?
National. It is national, yes.
And did you have historic tax credit funding as part of this?
We did not.
No.
From MPS? Okay. And was the masonry sealed with penetrating breathable sealer like silicone?
Absolutely not.
Okay, because that would, the breathability.
Yes, and this was part of a lot of research and negotiation, and particularly there's a woman named Amy Lamb Woods who works with the International Masonry Institute, who was a fantastic resource and steered us away from siloxane on this particular building.
Okay, great. If anyone else has questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll hear from Andrew for a little bit. It's a little after 10, so about 25 more minutes. Folks can stay on.
Two projects that I'm going to show, and this one that you see now is just started construction. The other one hasn't. So
I'm not seeing.
Have a little less information.
Andrew, can you try sharing?
Yeah. Oh, I am? I thought I was sharing.
I'm not seeing it. Anyone else?
Share. Well, try again. All right, I think I got it.
Yep. All right, excellent. Oh, now I'm seeing me. There we go.
I got to go back to the full screen. Okay. All right. Now I got to go backwards. All right. So neither of these projects are completed. This one's just started construction. So I'm only going to kind of give you a little overview of the design process and the path that we took to figure out how to do these occupied or not occupied. And it's basically 2 lessons of like understanding the building and having like a full team in place to do this, including the contractor, which was important to kind of figuring out the phasing and how to do these projects. So this is Jefferson Terrace, right next to the Harborview Hospital, which you see in the background. It doesn't always look the most photogenic building, but I managed to get one on a lucky shot one day, being somewhere where I shouldn't be, on a beautiful Seattle day. This was built for the Housing Authority in 1965. It's a building by Kirk Wallace McKinley. So this is Paul Kirk and one of his few large-scale buildings that he designed. This building is not a Seattle landmark. It could probably qualify as one. It is also not on the historic National Register of Historic Places, but all of that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't escape some kind of historic review, because it is listed as eligible in the state's inventory, which meant when it went through a NEPA process, the state historic preservation officer did have some jurisdiction about what was happening to the building. So official designations don't always clear you of everything that might occur. The project is based mostly a unit renovation, plumbing and ventilation improvements. There's also a small lobby addition. Its community room is kind of disconnected from the building, and it really had no lobby, so we're doing a small addition just to remedy that. It's built into the hillside, so this is the bottom floor, or the first floor, and it's gradually becomes bigger as you go up the building until you get to the 6th floor, which is actually the main entry. And then the typical floor. And the challenge of this was not only was it organized in stacks, it's also kind of daisy chained through the building. So the kitchen and the bathroom of these 2 units are connected, and the kitchen and the bathroom, and the kitchen and the bathroom, and the kitchen and the bathroom, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you couldn't just do this by stacks. You pretty much had to do it within the wings of the building. And so we now analyzed it into 4 phases. But because the east wing was a little less in units, we ended up sticking to 3. And this was a very vulnerable population who lives here, many people formerly homeless. So relocating people outside of this building in order to vacate it was nearly impossible. So we did settle on doing this one occupied, and that meant it was going to be about a 24-month construction process that just started 2 months ago. The second project I was going to show is the downtown YWCA. It was built for the YWCA in 1915 by Gould and Champley Architects. It is a City of Seattle landmark. It is on the National Register of Historic Places and will be going for tax credits. And the basic renovation would be to renovate 6 floors to create new studio and 1-bedroom apartments, and to do seismic upgrades. The building currently is organized with some commercial and public areas at the ground floor, the YWCA's offices on the 2nd floor, and what is currently single room occupancies that have been created over the last century. So what were some new old hospital rooms that were created in 1915, some hotel rooms that were created during a renovation in 1955, and a shelter on the 3rd floor that was for domestic abuse victims. And it was just a mix of different types of units, some that had bathrooms, some that had kitchenettes, some that just were rooms and bathrooms and kitchens down the hall. So they wanted to basically gut the 6 floors. And so we're taking out almost everything and trying to create units that are studio and 1-bedroom units with bathrooms and kitchens for each. So the new units would be organized by a stack of shafts that have both the plumbing and the ventilation in it. But our biggest problem was the seismic renovation. While we could organize this thing as a phased project, trying to use plumbing in an attic and plumbing at the 2nd floor ceiling in order to feed the stacks, unfortunately, the seismic walls that needed to be installed that go up to the 8th floor, some to the 5th floor, some all the way to the roof, had to go all the way to the basement. And that just proved impossible to do as a phased project. So this one, we analyzed it in many ways. It was going to be an occupied one at 20 to 26 months long, but in the end, we settled to make it a vacant building for 12 months and complete the construction in a much shorter time, which saved, I think, about $4.5 million just in the schedule for the project. This picture is what was the gymnasium in the building. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, that is all I was going to share.
Thanks, Andrew. Those are very interesting projects. Is the YMCA, is that built? Where is that in process?
That is scheduled to go under construction next spring.
Okay. All right. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll uncover lots of stuff between now and then. Are there other questions or other historic projects that folks want to share that they're working on, or they enjoyed going through landmarks or the historic process? No questions? Everybody's got this under control. I think, we do have these valuable assets. The energy code is becoming an issue. My firm has one project with Plymouth Housing in permitting right now, and working through the energy code has been a challenge. We've been working with RDH to prove that bringing it all the way up to the current energy code is not a good idea. Like Robert said, we are adding 2 additional inches of rock wool, but it doesn't quite meet the current energy code, and it's even less than the 15% they're allowed, but I think it's at 20% of the current. So it's getting close, but they keep cranking up the energy code requirements, and it is really challenging on these buildings. And I think at some point it seems like there needs to be a little bit more flexibility with the historic, maybe something codified even with SDCI that actually requires historic building owners to do some research into the masonry materials. Otherwise, we are going to, some buildings are going to get renovated potentially and even insulated in ways that isn't healthy for them because they're not willing to push back on the city.
Yep.
And so I don't know if anyone has some ideas on how to kind of move that forward with the city. I saw who was on the call here. One of our energy guys was on the call here. But I think it's something we need to consider as a group, as building owners of these historic properties, to figure out a way to meet with the city and so it's not just always a one-off battle with the energy code, with the reviewers.
Yeah, I like the idea of somehow codifying it, because yes, I was going to say it is always a one-off.
Yeah.
And I think we are I don't know if it was a code modification request that we ended up submitting, but it ended up being something like 130 pages long to satisfy SDCI's need for documentation. Who knows if they ever read it, but there it is.
And we did go through all the math and the science, like Robert said, and they just kind of ignored it, which was kind of disheartening. So it was an uphill battle.
Yeah, so it seems we need to, at least that piece shouldn't be a one-off, shouldn't be a continual. There should be there's documented science if there's 6 or 7 or these projects that have worked with different, especially if it's with different engineers and come up with very similar answers. That needs to just kind of, that science needs to be in the code. The point of the energy code is following the science.
I managed to get some requirements waived similar to what they did with the Fry, but every time I'm told, we'll do this, but don't consider it a precedent. And I think the idea of being able to give some relief should be a precedent, even though they may not want to do it the same thing for every building or same solutions for every building.
Yes, I mean, HDC could really be helpful in helping assemble a list of these non-precedents, so we know sort of what's possible in doing these things.
I mean, even the thermostat thing, Jill.
That's a good. That's a really cool
good
idea. I've got that one lined up now.
But it's not a 7-day programmable setback thermostat.
Right.
And this tenant group would be probably confused by a 7-day programmable setback thermostat. So
yeah, that I agree.
Wife,
that's a consistent concern with the new energy code, even with new units, that this thermostat is probably not the best.
We even toyed with the connection where you open the windows and the whole heat thing would go off, but that was not cost effective. So to go to this thermostat was I think kind of a win-win. So we just kind of have to prove that out.
Brad, was that
if I could just say one thing, I'd like to make a plug for some people here. I've done a lot of occupied remodels, and it is invaluable to have a relocation specialist as part of the team between the owner and the contractor and working with the tenants, because there's so many different pressure points, and it's nice to be able to have someone to rely on to deal with the emotional issues and a lot of the distractions involved in relocating tenants from floor to floor or packing up their stuff and just getting them out of the contractor's hair and somewhat out of the owner's hair, and giving them the resources to do that. So I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned, and done a number of these. And
maybe if could folks email Lauren all of the different, I don't know, maybe there's only 2 companies, I don't know. I think that would be great to have that resource.
And John, to your point, we were lucky enough to have Jill. She acted as our special manager at the Fry, and she did all that for us. It was kind of fun to walk into a day when we had an OAC, and you'd walk with her afterwards, and she knew the backstories of 234 people. Everybody said hi to her in the hall. She, had the steady hand when we had to enter a unit. It was neat.
Yeah,
so,
I'm just thinking back to one of our projects where I had to do about 80 units in a semi-occupied remodel. We had to move people out and bring them back. And one of the very early things I learned was that the architects in charge of doing the plans labeled all the units by number, but they weren't the unit numbers that we used to identify the units. So we really needed to sync those plans up at the very beginning, because unit 213 on one set was not unit 213 in the other. So details count.
I can't remember the name of the relocation consultant, another project that I was working on simultaneous with the Fry. I can't remember their name. They were awesome, and they realized that the building manager, who had been in the building for 20 years, had the sort of knowledge that Brad, you're talking about Jill holding, And this relocation consultant poached the building manager, hired her away from the building owner to become the relocation consultant, which was awesome.
Well, thank you. It was really fun to listen to all those stories.
I had a question regarding the relocation. I'm doing a couple of occupied renovations in the International District. Does anybody have thoughts about whether the kind of the movers, packers, all that should be under the contractor, or whether it works better if that's entirely separated?
I would keep them separate. The contractor's got too many other things to coordinate, and the tenants never follow schedule.
Exactly. And it's a markup to them.
Yeah.
It needs to be closely coordinated because they're trying to schedule their trades to move into those units. And so those typically, you're talking every week, but the projects I've been on, they've been separated.
And actually, it really helps to have the contractor be the gorilla controlling the master schedule, which forces everyone else to follow. I mean, we've got to be out. I don't care what your complaints are, what special considerations are. The power goes off tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Well, here's another caveat to that is we did have some tenants who kind of, dug their heels in and would not move.
No kidding.
And that throws a wrench into things. So, and if you had a bed bug unit, you had to skip it. And so there were some inefficiencies that we ran into. So
Yeah, we definitely had that where we agree about having the relocation organization separate of the contractor, but it is a really close relationship between construction and relocation. And we like to say that we have a plan A, B, and C, and the schedule is that way too, right? So every day with our guys and subs, it's like the plan is to go to this unit and this unit, but we all know that sometimes people don't move or sometimes people are sick or all kinds of things. And that's one of the things where we try to stay flexible, and we know there's a master schedule, but a lot of times we have to jump units or, juggle stuff. And we balance that with subcontractors and our own guys. Sometimes we'll do work self-performed just so it's easier for us to move around when things don't, people don't move out when they're supposed to, and they have, personal issues.
We've actually, on some of our projects, the relocation specialist was part of our OAC meetings because they're so critical to the schedule.
Yeah, one of the things we did with a severely bed bug infested unit was we didn't want to move their furniture. We put it all in pods, took it off, had it fumigated for 2 months, and basically created a dozen hotel rooms and other apartments that we had, and just furnished them and sort of move people in and out of that. And so we had the sort of same transition units. We were fortunate that we had another building to do that with, but
We had a couple tricks that worked well too, where we developed this program called Trash for Cash, where if somebody was, hoarding, then we would compensate them. Basically, like, a piece of furniture would be worth. Well, I mean, like, it was a little arbitrary, but it was like a bag, a garbage bag or a couch would maybe be like $15. And we would just actually pay them to get rid of stuff. And then on some of our really bad units, we did what we called a shower and move, where we would basically say, look, you're going to walk away from your unit. I mean, there would be some conversation and convincing, of course, but we would convince, usually successfully, them to walk away from their unit, and we would furnish a new unit with all new stuff, new bed, new bedding, basic clothes, basic kitchen stuff. They would take a shower and walk away from their unit, and then we would get in and remediate it. So, I mean, we got pretty creative with bribes and I mean, because it's a lot less expensive to do something like that than it is to stop the whole project.
You'll have to build it into your budget.
Yeah,
Right.
We were lucky enough too at the Fry. We had a basement, and we have a hot box down there, a big like shed that we use to heat up items and kill stuff there. I'm not sure how often that was used, Jill, but that was an option.
Often.
Okay.
that something that continues to be on site as
Yeah.
needed as people move in, their stuff goes to the hot box before they move into their unit, or is that
I
just
don't
as
think that they're
needed?
doing it that proactively, but I think if they have an infestation and they have furniture that wants to be saved, then they'll move it down and bake it for a day or two. Yeah.
I think your idea about that, where the person got to shower and go to a new unit with new stuff, is really smart, because you
Mhm.
just unloaded all that baggage to that person too, right? I mean,
Mhm.
they can just walk away from all their troubles, you know, sort of. Because that's a big thing with people, is they just can't wrap their mind around all
So
their
it's-
stuff and moving, and, you know, it's,
And then you have to convince them to move back. I mean,
Yeah.
that's always the next part.
yeah,
You know,
that's really smart. Yeah.
we did,
We always had a few extra dumpsters as well.
Yeah.
right, yes, the contractor dropped the dumpsters, which was
An empty
great.
dumpster is very inviting to people moving,
Yeah.
so.
We'll carry it down there for you and throw it in the dumpster.
No, we had a 54 unit building. There was a complete move out. And it just so happened that Vulcan finished a project of about that size. And they were overjoyed to lease out the entire building in one fell swoop. So we moved all 54 people into this market rate kind of glitzy Vulcan project somewhere. So moving back was,
Yeah, I was gonna say moving back seems like it was.
Want to go back, yeah.
Well, hopefully it was better than what they left, so.
much.
Right. Well, thank you all. I have to leave, but bye-bye.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. I think if anyone wants to follow up with notes, I think maybe I would definitely be interested in doing a little bit of summary, at least with resources. And if you could send a list of what projects that you have bent the energy code on, let's at least get a short list and include, who the architect and contractor was and the owner. And we'll at least make a list. That'll be a start. And then we'll think about where to proceed with this issue. Great. Appreciate everybody. I think one of my main takeaways was if you keep it occupied, you can't lose your occupancy permit. I hadn't really thought that one through, so I think that's kind of cool. Can you keep one person in? Anyways, all right. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Time for wine and Cheez-Its.
Thank you, Jill. Take care.